Greetings, everyone. My name is Emmanuel, and I would like to welcome you to our program today. We are continuing with our series on rebuilding a new Africa through decentralization. And our topic today is Christian worship requires us to do righteousness and justice in our communities and nations. Yesterday, we said that the gospel of the kingdom is against political oppression. The gospel of the kingdom is against social discrimination. The gospel of the kingdom is against economic exploitation. The gospel of the kingdom is against corruption. The gospel of the kingdom is against, the marginalization of minority groups in our communities and in our nations. Today we are going to build on that which we discussed yesterday. That is why our topic today is true Christian worship requires us to do righteousness and justice in our communities and nations. You see, the children of Israel, they were God's people who were delivered from their captivity in Egypt, and God gave them the laws of Moses. And the law of Moses prohibited them from oppressing their own people. The law of Moses prohibited them from exploiting their people. The law of Moses prohibited them from worshiping idols. But the children of Israel, they disobeyed God's laws, and they were worshiping idols, and they were oppressing their people, and they were exploiting their people. They were denying justice to their people. You see, what the children of Israel were doing to their people is similar to what, our elites, our politicians in Africa are doing to their own people. Our founding fathers, they fought against colonialism, and they got their independence. And today, instead of building roads, building hospitals, allowing freedom of speech, developing our communities and our nations, they are busy oppressing the poor. They are busy exploiting, the poor and the needy. They are busy marginalizing minority groups that are in our communities and in our nations. You see, God was not happy with the children of Israel. Why? Because they were exploiting the poor. They were denying justice to the people. They were worshiping idols. These were God's own people. And they would pray and fast and bring their sacrifices to God. At the same time, they were exploiting the people, they were marginalizing the people, they were inflicting pain and suffering upon the people, and they were depriving the people of justice. So God raised up the prophets to warn them and to tell them that He was not going to accept their sacrifices. That is why Prophet Amos tells us in Amos chapter 5, verse 24, the prophet told the people that God is not interested in their singing. God is not interested in their dancing. God is not interested in their sacrifices. Rather, God wanted them to do righteousness and justice in their communities. It's the same thing that Prophet Hosea said to the people. Hosea chapter 6 verse 8. He told the people that God requires justice, not sacrifice from them. It's the same thing that Prophet Isaiah spoke to the Jewish people in Isaiah chapter 58. The people were seeking God. They wanted to hear God, but they were oppressing the people at the same time. They were denying, justice to the people. They could not feed the hungry people amongst them. They were not providing shelter for those who were homeless, and they were not clothing the naked amongst them. God asked them, is this the kind of fast that I am asking from you? Is this the kind of fast that I am requiring from you? I'm not interested in your sacrifices. I'm not interested in your prayers. What I want you to do is to do justice and righteousness in your communities. You see, God was not interested in their sacrifices, but the people thought that their rituals will be accepted by God in spite of the way they were treating their people. They thought that what they were doing in the temple will be accepted by God in spite of what they were doing to their people. You see, to love God is to treat people with dignity and respect. But they thought that bringing their sacrifices to God will be accepted. But God rejected their sacrifices. God did not answer them because they were exploiting and oppressing their own people. You see, in the New Testament, Apostle James tells us that true religion that is accepted by God is visiting the orphans and the widows in their afflictions. Who is afflicting the orphans today in our communities in Africa and in some other countries? Who is afflicting the widows? Who is the one responsible for the pain and suffering of the African people? The African people are suffering because of the bad policies of our politicians. Africa is blessed, but our people are suffering. Africa is rich in minerals, but our people are suffering. Our political elites, they are oppressing us. Our political elites, they are exploiting us. Our political elites, they are oppressing the poor and the needy in our communities and in our nations. You see, even Jesus himself rebuked the scribes and the Pharisees. He said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Why? Because they were focusing on collecting tithes and they neglected, they omitted the weightier matters of the law, namely justice, mercy, and faith. As a result of that, Jesus himself rebuked them. That is why it is important for the church to stand up for the oppressed in our communities and in our nations. That is why the church is the voice of the voiceless. The church is the defender of the defenseless. The church is the conscience of the nation. The church is the eyes to the blind. The church must promote righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations. You see, God rejected the prayers of the Jewish people because they were oppressing the poor and the needy and the orphans and the strangers in their communities. They were exploiting their own people. They were segregating There was social injustice against their own people. As a result of that, God rejected their sacrifices. As a result of that, God refused to answer their prayers. My dear brothers and sisters, it is time for the church to be the voice of the voiceless in our communities and in our nations. It is good for us to go to our local churches and dance and sing and give our tithes and our offerings and listen to the wonderful sermons from our pastors. But as we do that, we must also promote righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations. That is why Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Remember, Jesus did not say, seek ye first the kingdom of God. He said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. That is why the church is supposed to be the voice of the voiceless. That is why the church is supposed to be the defender of the defenseless. When we do that, we are seeking the righteousness of God, the justice of God in our communities and in our nations. When we seek the righteousness and justice of God in our communities and in our nations, we will be rebuilding a new Africa that will benefit all the citizens in our nations and in our communities. Thank you so much for watching this video. We are going to continue next time. Until then, bye-bye.